One of my roles working for the city is I oversee the administration of the cemeteries here in Athens. I happened upon this individual, John Frank Oldfield, who's buried at the West Union Street Cemetery, a little bit by happenstance. So one of his descendants, I believe his granddaughter, passed away a couple years ago, and the family had reached out. They don't live in this area anymore. And we were chatting, and at the same time that they had contacted me about interring their family member, I had found this book about John Frank Oldfield and the Black Hand Society. And I'd read that book, and I had mentioned, I've read about your patriarch. I'm so interested. Would you tell me more? So I had a chance to interview some of the family, direct descendants of John Frank Oldfield, and learned so much interesting stuff that wasn't included in the book, but it made me even more interested in this individual. And if you go into the West Union Street Cemetery, if you've ever been in there before, if you go up to the top of the hill, there's a flagpole, and that's kind of where the Memorial Day services typically happen for the city. Directly to the left on the driveway is this very large headstone that says Oldfield. And that is the Oldfield lot. It's probably the most prominent spot in the cemetery at the very top of the hill. It's not the largest, headstone, but it's in probably one of the most prominent locations almost smack in the center of the cemetery. And I've seen it before and made a mental note about it. But as I read that book, it clicked. I said, I know this person. I want to know more about them. And after getting to know the family a little bit and learning some more, it uncovered a mystery. I'm going to share with you some of that mystery today. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and where my headspace is when we were thinking through who's John Frank Oldfield and why is he important to Athens and to the wider community. To know John Frank Oldfield is to know about the U.S. Post Office Inspection Service, or the Postal Inspection Service. Postal Inspection Service is not one of the most well-known federal agencies, but it's the first federal law enforcement agency in the United States, founded in 1775, long before the FBI existed, long before the CIA, the ATF, or any of those other acronym, three-letter government agencies. Dates before the U.S. Marshals Service even. The Post Office Inspection Service is really to regulate the mail, to think back, the primary means of communication is through the written word if you're separated by distance. And so it's very important during that time that parcels and letters and information is distributed in a regulated way and without any interference. Most people know the U.S. Post Office Inspection Service through their work in the late 1800s with train robberies. So the mail heading out west on the western frontier, some not so great characters were robbing the mail trains because not only are you sending letters, but you're sending packages, you're sending money, you're sending all sorts of things through the mail service, and they were the primary agency at that time that is investigating those cases and prosecuting them. They have a lot of power. Even today, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service has a lot of power. People just don't know it. And the standard is, if it has anything to do with the mail at all, and lots of things have an association with the mail, with the sending and receiving of mail, they have unrestricted access to investigate. And it's pretty interesting to me because most other federal agencies have much more limited scopes. They can take over cases so long as they can show that it has some sort of association with the receiving or sending of postage. And if you think about sending in taxes, if you think about sending in things through official means, if you're committing some sort of fraud, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service can be involved in that to a certain degree. What is also interesting, even though it's the oldest, it has the fewest line of duty deaths of any federal agency. So at the time that I put together this presentation, 15 officers had died in line of duty for some reason, and most of that is in the earlier part of the 20th century and the late part of the 19th century. So not so much today. So that brings us to John Frank Oldfield, John Oldfield or Frank Oldfield. He's originally from Ellicott City, Maryland, born in 1867. Interesting story, his family was a very well-connected family, politically connected in Maryland. They had a lot of political influence. At that time, being a postmaster and other appointments related to the Postal Service were all political appointments. And so their connection with high-ranking officials put them into positions of power and influence. And basically, his dad was a postmaster. He did a stint doing a couple of different jobs through federal appointments. He got into a little bit of hot water. At a certain point, he needed to move out of the area, and he was given a political appointment to be a postal inspector. And he moved to Ohio, working for the Post Office Inspection Service. Athens doesn't have a post office inspection service. It didn't during that time either. What did happen was, in order to protect his family because of the work that he was doing, he located them far enough away from his work life that if bad actors were to go after him, they'd have a harder time finding his family. So his office, he had an office in Columbus, Ohio. He also spent some time in Cincinnati as well. And so through those two places, his family lived here in Athens. His wife was a socialite. She was, as much as he wasn't, she was, and she loved hosting people and loved to be connected in the community. She hosted dances at her house and parties, and think of all the different, important people of town. She knew them all, and they'd all hang out with her, and she was a pretty well-connected person here in the community. Which brings us to the Society of the Banana, which is a really interesting, weird name. Think about the time in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There's this very large immigration that's happening from Europe to the United States, primarily from Italy and then later Eastern Europe. This is soon after, a lot of the Irish had already immigrated to the United States, so about a generation after that. And so we have this next wave of large-scale immigration that's happening. The Italian immigrants mostly coming from southern Italy and Sicily, the island of Sicily. In Italy, organized crime at that time was just a part of the landscape. And that organized crime made its way over to the United States, which is interesting because the US government, until the mid-19-teens, did not officially recognize that any mafia existed. There was no organized crime, and the reason that the federal government knew there was no organized crime in the United States, or Italian organized crime, was because they interviewed people and nobody said that there was. So they interviewed these immigrants and said, can you tell us about this organized crime that's happening, that we're getting wind of? And they're like, there's no organized crime. We don't know what you're talking about. We're not saying anything. So the official stance was there is no Italian mafia in the United States. There is no organized crime. We've talked to the people that are supposed victims, and none of them will talk. Now we know now there's a reason why they're not talking. Most of the crime is happening inside that community. It's mostly poor immigrants, individuals that are trying to get a start in the United States, that have limited access to certain resources, that have limited ability to communicate because, again, being mostly speaking Italian, not really speaking much English, there are some challenges. And so they were kind of easy pickings for the organized crime, unfortunately. to shake them down, especially early immigrants that are becoming more successful. So there's a method toward extorting those groups of people. Society of the Banana is an organized crime ring that is expanded all the way from the East Coast through the Midwest. So there are, locations, cities where this organized crime is happening, and you could probably name them fairly accurately because of the histories of those communities. So thinking of Youngstown, Pittsburgh, Chicago, New York, all the places that you would think of, all the way down to New Orleans, have elements of this organized crime ring. Why are they the Society of the Banana? Well, the reason that they're called the Society of the Banana is because produce and the movement of produce at that time, it's not very shelf stable. So there has to be a supply chain to deliver fresh fruits and veggies across the United States, and each one of those stops in the supply chain is a potential extortion point. And so if you are a driver to get from point A to point B, maybe you need to pay out a little bit of protection money in order to let your produce go through. Perhaps you have competing interests with another grocer, and you can do a little bit of arm twisting to get your shipment through before the other person. So it's every point from the dock, if it's an import, an international import, to local import, or not import, but local movement of produce around the United States. Bananas in particular, are coming from outside the United States for the most part. They're a commodity that's being processed through all these steps in the supply chain process, which then gets you to the end grocer that holds it. And many of the organized crime rings fronts are fruit grocers. And so you have, every community needs a grocery store, and communities need grocers in these areas. So if you're an upstart immigrant, it's not a bad business plan, but it also comes with this pitfall that organized crime can be and will be a part of that process, unfortunately. So immigrants will receive a letter, an extortion letter. It's written in Italian. So there's the first thing, where the federal government, they don't have a lot of people that are interpreting other languages. So it seems like a communication between people that speak the same language. They call themselves the Black Hand, and you'll see on the letter example here, there's some pretty gruesome little pictures, and in the middle of it is a hand. So they call themselves, the Black Hand will get you if you don't give us what we want, and here's the address to send it to. You may not get paid a visit from a person. You may just receive a threatening letter with directions on where to send the money. And so in this particular case, the demand is for $200. Now think of, early 1900s, $200 is a lot of money to be extorted. And the little pictures are depicting what will happen to you if you don't give in. So in this one, you're going to be killed. There's a dagger, and the little crosses, are, your alternative is you will die if you don't give us what we want. And so we see that with the letter. There were instances of stabbings, there were instances of bombings and kidnapping. So it wasn't just an empty threat. Those things did happen. The Mano Nera was an operation from 1880 to 1910. Organized crime obviously continued, long after that and continues today. But this particular ring was an operation for that period of time. Which brings us to the Amicon brothers. John and Charles, they're fruit merchants, they're Italian immigrants, and they live in Columbus, Ohio. They are very, very successful. They have one of the largest warehouses anywhere Columbus, Ohio is a hub, so they're not only selling in Columbus, but they're also sending out products all around the United States. And so they become very well known in the Columbus area. They are well-to-do, socially connected, politically connected individuals. Well, they receive a letter from the Black Hand demanding $10,000. And being upstarts and individuals that have earned what they have and being connected the way that they are, they didn't take that seriously, and they refused to pay. And John's quote is, "I won't pay even a dime." And you can imagine the people that are trying to do the extorting, how upset they are that they're not receiving. This is a big payment. This is like the big catch for organized crime. So they start not just getting threats, but also the follow-through of threats. And so John has a stick of dynamite left on his porch, and then finds a dagger in the garden. And Charles, the brother, his house is bombed. Now, the expectation in that immigrant community is it all stays internal. This is our own issue. We don't bring in anybody from the outside. And so against their community norms, their culture, they approach the authorities about these threats because it's become very serious. The bombing has happened now, and they're concerned for themselves and for their families and for their associates. So that brings back John Frank Oldfield. Oldfield gets wind of this. In his work in Columbus, he has a conversation with the brothers, and he's reaching a little bit because, again, the federal government says there is no mafia. This is not a thing, and they're not going to commit resources to investigating this. So he has to get a little bit creative. So hires a private investigator, got an off-the-books guy to help him out, and through that investigation, they start to piece things together. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But they identify some prime suspects in this investigation. The Lima brothers, Salvatore and Sebastiano in Marion, Ohio. It seems like they have a motive, and they also have some very unusual activity happening around their business. And so, again, in order for Oldfield to formally investigate this, he has to connect what he's finding out to the mail somehow in order to actually open up a formal investigation. So what he does is pretty interesting. The stamps at the time, he created secret marks, a little code on stamps, and worked with the postmaster at the local post office to issue stamps to the Lima brothers that have that secret mark. And then, by connecting to other suspected locations and other postmasters, following and tracking where that mail is going, and who's receiving it, who's sending it, and where it ultimately ends up. And so what he finds is this extensive network going all the way from Chicago, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, even to Italy of communications. And so he's starting to connect these dots and creates this web of just how extensive this organized crime is. What eventually happens, because they're discovering large sums of money being shipped to certain places, letters being sent, and money coming back to specific locations, back to Marion. So, a letter goes out from that location, and then suddenly a few days later, a sum of money comes back. They discover that there's going to be a meeting of these bosses. So he brings in people to help him interpret letters. They're opening letters, which is outside of their authority. They're not supposed to be opening up letters, but they're doing that anyway, and they're learning all this information. They call themselves the Banana Company, and they have a code, and I might hit on this later as well, but the code is so simple. If you're a fruit grocer, it's reasonable that you are going to be ordering all sorts of different types of fruit. And there might be certain prices for certain fruit. And so the communications would be, we are getting 12 crates of bananas, and here's the value of it. And we're getting this and getting that. But it's all code for, we're extorting this person for this amount of money. We're extorting this person. It's going to be coming from this location. And so they're able to identify fairly ingeniously how the system works and figure out the books, because they're just using a very simple fruit to dollar amount that wouldn't make sense from like just a regular trades situation, because it's large sums of money. So they have this secret meeting in Marion from all these people coming to Little Marion at the time. They identify 43 people, and they're having this discussion about who's going to lead the organization, because the leader at the time, he's getting older and he needs to name a successor. So imagine like those old mob movies where they have like a meeting of the families and they're all identifying who's going to step up and be the next person, who's going to be the crime. That's exactly what's happening here. It's fairly accurate. What's interesting with the investigation is Oldfield, again, he's kind of a brash guy. He's kind of going against the grain. He's acting somewhat outside of his authority. His other postal inspectors, he's got a small team, but the leadership are not very interested in the work that he's doing. So he's having to use local postmasters. He's using some associates, and he's also using off-the-books private investigators to help him. And basically, as this meeting is happening, they start identifying the trains, where the train's coming from, who's on the trains, and when they arrive. And so they were able to, at the train station, basically check off the list. Oh, this person from New Orleans has arrived. This person from Chicago has arrived. This person from Youngstown has arrived. This person from Cleveland has arrived. And they're matching everything up that, their hunch is correct. There is something to this idea that there's some organized crime, because on paper, it's matching up to what's actually happening. All those people are arriving, so they've got it right and they're onto something. That meeting that happened is so wild, because they have it in the back room of a fruit grocer's, the Lima brothers' back office, and the investigators are outside listening to the meeting through the windows. So, not a very sophisticated investigation. They're doing some good old-fashioned detective work here. They're learning about all of it, and they have interpreters, because they're speaking in Italian, translating all of it. So they basically made their own meeting minutes of knowing who the head of the organization is, who's going to be the successor, all the places and people and how they're connected and who they're extorting and for how much, and they get all of it. And so Oldfield is able to get a warrant. He's able to get the support of his fellow postal inspectors, and can officially have this investigation, because now he has the proof. He has all the information. And so in June 1909, excuse me, they take the ring down, and the brothers are arrested. In their office, there is a chest full of weapons, all sorts of different types of weapons: brass knuckles, long guns, handguns, knives, daggers, swords, you name it, they have all this stuff. They also have a list of names, victims, and amounts extorted over time. So they kept the books, just like you would with a business, very, very well detailed, good record keeping. Bad for them, good for the postal inspectors, because it's a slam dunk, because they wrote it all down. So they're able to identify all these people, all the victims, how much, what the total amounts are, so they're able to build this case. This bust is not just in Ohio. They deploy this bust all over the United States to take down all these people at the same time. So all throughout the Midwest. One instance, a man who's about to be arrested, he creates a hewn wall of women and children. Very, very brave of him. And he's also fully armed, anticipating this hostile encounter for being taken down. Now he is taken down, but no honor among thieves kind of thing, using women and children to protect yourself to get away with your crimes. One person was not caught immediately, Salvatore Arrigo. He is the godfather. So that meeting, he's an old man at this point. The ring has been going for a couple of decades, and he's passing off and handing off power. This is kind of interesting. He's a sucker for sweets, and he's a sucker for alcohol. And so again, doing the exact same postal work that they did before of tracking packages through postage stamps, they're able to figure out where he is, and I believe he was just outside of Cincinnati on a farm, if I recall correctly. He's getting these care packages from the Italian, the Italian community, the mob community, and they're able to figure out exactly where he is using the same method as before, which I find hilarious because he can't just keep a low profile. He needs to his luxury items. So fast forward to the trial. There's a picture of some of the defendants and their mug shots. You'll notice that many of them have this very big mustache, which is a style of that time, is very common amongst that community, both young and old. And I wish I could grow a mustache that awesome. I can't though. It's just not going to look that good. The Federal Court of Toledo is the federal court that takes the case. There's a 150-page indictment, and it has everything you can imagine. I mean, they don't need many witnesses because they have so much physical evidence. But they do get the eyewitness testimony from John Amicon and how he was extorted, what happened to him and his brother, all the instances of dynamite and houses blowing up and daggers found in gardens and all that kind of stuff. The trial did not last very long for that number of defendants. It's really about an 11-day trial. The trial, the defendants are found guilty with all sorts of sentences between 2 and 16 years, depending on the severity and their involvement. And here's something that we would not do today. If you have a series of defendants that are all on the same case together, we would not send all of them to the same prison together to then live together as they serve out their sentences. And so I'm wondering if the federal government got wise to this after the sentencing, but they all go to Leavenworth Penitentiary with only one person sent to a reformatory. You can imagine that they don't cease all of their operations, for as much as it's stymied from the bust. They're still fairly active in their community, and they can still send and receive letters, and they can all scheme together because they all are living together in the same penitentiary, basically in the same cell block. We wouldn't do that today. Or I hope we wouldn't do that today. 3 of the accused out of the 40 plus were not tried. They had a separate trial, just a single conviction from that. Those guys were like low-level muscle guys. They weren't the organizers, they're the movers. And so they didn't have, they caught their big fish. These little guys that we don't know if they cooperated or the circumstances. All I know is that there's just a single conviction for out of the 3 that were tried on a separate trial. So that brings us to the goodies. And so this is a picture from the trial that shows some of the weapons that were taken. Pretty extensive little collection that they have here. I hope if you all can see that in the corner over there a little bit. Good. The chain of evidence and what happens to the evidence after a trial at that time is a little bit loose. So today, evidence after trial would either be destroyed or taken and locked away if there's going to be another trial in the future, or taken by the court for another purpose. In this case, after the trial is over, all this evidence gets collected back by Oldfield. Oldfield gets to keep it as souvenirs and gives out some of it to some of his associates that helped him, and the rest of it he kept for himself as as a souvenir. He also kept all the indictment papers, all the court papers that he had, all of the records. So all of the evidence, basically, he got to retain all of it as a souvenir for himself. And that's kind of interesting to me. I can't imagine that would happen today in that same way. And what's interesting to me is when I met or talked with Oldfield's descendants, their family, one of them has one of the weapons. He still has it. He was able to share some information with me about it. He says that he has to write a written report every year to the FBI, that he still has it. They haven't confiscated it back from him, but he has to supply information that he still has in his possession. He hasn't sold it or bartered it or done anything with it. And he said he's shot it a couple of times, and it's very cool. And I wish I could do that because it seems really interesting to me. But the majority of these weapons are a mystery. We know that Oldfield took them. We know that the family confirms that he had them, and we also know that some of the weapons still exist and are still in possession. So what happened to the rest of the weapons? That's an interesting question. Which brings us back to Athens. So connecting all this, this very large organized crime ring back to Athens. So Oldfield, he's not a very old man, but he has cancer, and he dies in 1916 here in Athens, and he's buried at the West Union Street Cemetery. His family continues to be involved in Athens into the late 1950s, and they moved around a couple of times. I've got a picture of one of his sons on the Athens High School football team during the I believe it was the either 1914 or 1915 season, and so he's standing in the back row with the players for Athens High School football on a lot, which I think is kind of interesting. But they're around the community. Fast forward a little bit, this received a lot of national attention at the time. It was in all the major papers. It was reported on all around the country. But over time, the Oldfield story mostly was forgotten, and was replaced with the mobster stuff that you read and you hear about and you see in movies and TV today. That precursor to it really isn't hit on too much in media until Oldfield's great-grandson, William, publishes a book just a few years ago in 2018 where he's really writing his family history. So he's got these family stories and he's got information, and so he writes about his great-grandfather and busting the first organized Italian crime in the United States. And it has caught on since then. There's another book that was published by another person about this. When I talked to the family, I talked to William, and I talked to his brother Hamilton not that long ago. They were telling me that they are receiving options for movies right now based on the book, that there's a lot of interest to turn the story into a movie, which I think is really interesting. I'd love for them to come and film in Athens as part of that and part of telling that story. But after talking to him and learning about this, it got me really thinking, what happened to those weapons? Where are the weapons? So I asked him, what do you think happened to those weapons? He goes, well, our family story. And he's like, I think this is true because I talked to my great-grandmother about this, and I've talked to my grandmother and my mom or my dad. I think it's in Athens. I think that those weapons are still in Athens, and I'll tell you why. My great-grandmother, she was scared after her husband died, and she didn't want to have anything to do with this case. And there are 2 steamer trunks. One steamer trunk was filled with all of the documents and papers, and the other had the weapons. And our family story is she buried it in the garden. She had one of the people working for her buried it in the backyard. And he's like, and I absolutely believe that was the case. And I have one of the weapons. We've got other weapons, but we have a whole bunch that are missing. And we're all together when he died. And so it's like, I'd like to know more about this. And they didn't tell me where they lived or anything like that. I started doing some property record searches and discovered the location of the house. And last year, Tom O'Grady and myself went up and paid a visit to that family, and to protect them and not have a bunch of people descend on their house searching for buried treasure. I'll spare you the location, but Tom and I went up and visited with the people that live there and had a really great conversation. I think I ended up staying almost 2.5 hours, and I brought up this story, and they are agreeable to allow us to do some additional research on the property to see if this actually pans out. And I'm like, so interested. And unfortunately, I was going to do this last year. I was going to do the search for these buried weapons last year, but some other life things got in the way. I've got a baby right now, and so we're going to revisit that here very soon. I'm working with a person at Ohio University that has access to a ground-penetrating radar, so we don't have to be invasive, and to do a scan of the yard. And that's one property that's a lead, and that was like the lead, until I got a call around the same time from somebody in a student neighborhood. The family owns the house, and they said, hey, we've been cleaning up behind the garage and we found something. And I was like, oh, what did you find? And they didn't know anything about this. They just found what appeared to be a headstone, and they wanted to call the city and find out if there was a cemetery in their backyard or if there was some other issue. And because I take care of cemeteries, I had a conversation with them. And I said, can you describe it for me? And they said, yes. And this is a picture of it. It's hard to see, but what that says is JFO in granite. And it's a stone, and I was like, immediately, because I was working on this case, John Frank Oldfield, it's gotta be. So I was like, I wonder if there's a connection there. So I go back to the property records. The Oldfield family bought this house after selling the other house. I was like, well, that's really strange. Why would they put a headstone, JFO, he had died years before, down on this other property? That's really strange. So I asked for permission to go down to that house to look at it myself. And traipsed around in the backyard. And this is in the middle of a student neighborhood. So one, I'm surprised that this hasn't been vandalized, broken, stolen, or something, that it's still sitting there. And they said it's been sitting there for a very long time. And I wanted to know if there's any other writing on it. So kind of lifted it up, turned on its side, and I dropped it back down because it's very heavy. And I know what the sound should have sounded like when it hits the ground. And I'm telling you, it didn't make that sound. It made a much more hollow sound. And so I haven't, as the second site, I'm very interested to see if one of those 2 locations pans out, because that is unusual. And again, John Frank Oldfield, he has a headstone up at the cemetery. He's got all that. Most people aren't going to start digging around what they think is a burial of some sort, except for me, maybe, or Terry. We're weird like that. We're very interested to take it to the next chapter. And my goal last year was to get this all resolved, and I was going to come and present and show you the goodies and have the trunk. But I haven't gotten that yet. But I'm very interested. I'm very excited to come back soon with more information about this story and hopefully resolve the case of John Frank Oldfield in Athens. And it's been, one of those like things that just in the back of my head all the time, like thinking about like, I've got to figure this out. There in the book and in my interview with William, he had mentioned that they did have the steamer trunk for the papers, and I believe in the book, or it may have been in an article, I can't remember which, he had said that the papers were all damaged in a flood. And being from Athens and knowing the flooding history of Athens narrows things down a little bit as to the location of the house and what I know about the locations of the houses, that like, oh, that's very interesting that the papers were damaged in a flood. That might be the student neighborhood. So I'm hopeful to come back again and share with you the conclusion of this. I'll leave you on the edge of your seat. But with that, I want to thank you for coming out this afternoon to hear a little bit about this. I'm happy to take a couple of questions. I will not tell you the location of either one of those because I know some of you are too curious and might do your own investigating. We want to be respectful of those families that live here. So with that, thank you very much.